Fear. What comes to mind when I say that word? Drowning feels like your lungs are suffocated, injected full of seawater, whilst getting pummeled in the face from a never-ending line of tidal waves. Gasping for a desperate microsecond of breath, flailing your arms in desperation to escape a vacuum that you just seem to be sinking deeper and deeper into. Drowning was my biggest fear in life, and I was able to overcome it, all because I spent countless hours studying the real secrets of the world's most fearless people, which I'll share with you in this video. So let's set the stakes. The challenge I set out for myself at the end of 2020 was that as an adult who doesn't know how to swim, I have to be able to swim 1 kilometer by the end of 2022 and do an open water swim.
Which was a pretty stupid goal because I'm afraid of water going the wrong way in the shower.
And it got me thinking, why am I so afraid of water? Let me take you back to my year 5 swimming carnival. Although I couldn't swim and never went to swimming lessons as a child, since my parents couldn't afford it, I'd practiced some backstroke in my friend's pool, so I thought it would be a great idea to enroll in the 50-meter backstroke race.
This was a terrible idea.
And this is where my memory becomes hazy. All I remember is finishing the race and feeling triumphant. I felt like the whole school was jumping and clapping, excited for me that I had finished the race. Until years later, and my friend told me the real story. The whole school had thought one of the disabled children was participating in the race, and everyone got up to stand and cheer him on. Apparently at points of the race, he would even grab onto the side railing and pull himself to the finish line. That part I do remember. So wait, what are the real secrets that allows the most fearless people in the world to do insane achievements? There are 3 things I found they all have in common, and they might surprise you. But first, it was time for me to get into my local pool and face my fears. And after weeks of watching YouTube videos on how to learn to swim, this is where I got. Yeah, I needed help. So I watched more YouTube video tutorials, went to the pool like a fanatic, and would train with any friend who was willing. And slowly, I was getting better. Every time I would go to the pool to practice, my anxiety was sky high.
I am scared.
And I would feel like I was about to die every time I entered the pool. But even the most fearless people feel afraid. The first thing I learned from the most fearless people was a game changer for me. They felt fear like me, and so what I should do is to act in spite of fear. I had to learn to be okay being uncomfortable, learning to tolerate the discomfort. Months rolled past, and just as I was getting close to my goal, a global pandemic hit. Every pool in the country closed down for an entire year, and all the progress, all the goals I had hit, all suddenly went to zero. To tell you the truth, I almost abandoned this goal. I thought, what's the point? Why am I so obsessed over doing this? And I realized it all started when I almost drowned. When I sat in a little stream with my friends and cried with laughter as the natural water slide jetted our bodies out towards the ocean. My cries of laughter quickly turned to cries of panic as the current pulled us out and I saw the beach shoreline get further and further away. I was caught in a rip. My feet barely able to touch the bottom of the sand, my head slowly sinking lower and lower whilst being hammered by waves. I inhaled liters of seawater, and in between breaths, I managed to quietly gargle, "Help." My friend locked eyes with me and literally said, "Sorry, dude," and proceeded to swim himself to shore. Yup. Somehow I managed to just go into fight or flight mode and pushed as much water as I could behind me and under me while keeping my head as far out of the water as I could, flopping around in a diagonal line trying to get out of the direction of the rip towards the shore until finally I made it. This event became a defining moment for me. Every pool party, every beach outing for years after this, I would remember this moment and feel my heart in my throat. Every time I was near water with friends, I would feel embarrassed that I was the one kid that was scared and no one else was. I felt like a loser. I felt like a victim. And I was sick of feeling that way. So before moving on to how I overcame that feeling, this second pattern I've noticed amongst the most fearless people might be the hardest to implement, but the results are exponential. And it's that they apply a principle that world-leading psychologists use for people with extreme phobias, a technique called graded exposure therapy. This therapy slowly and incrementally exposes you to an anxiety-provoking experience until you're able to master the scenario. When you feel fear, your urge is to avoid that situation. Whilst that makes you feel better, it keeps you from learning that if you stick with a situation, your body will adapt and your anxiety will come down on its own. Exposure therapy shows that the more you expose yourself to the anxiety stimulus, the less anxiety you feel. A practical way of doing this is by making a fear hierarchy where you list all the situations that make you anxious about a particular scenario and rate them 0 to 10. Let's say, for example, bees make you extremely afraid. So having a bee on your arm would be a 10 out of 10 anxiety level. But looking at a cartoon of a bee is a 1 out of 10. And then you fill up the spectrum of levels in between. After which you pick a low starting point, aim for a level of 3 to 4 out of 10, and keep doing that until it lowers in intensity by 1 level. And then slowly increasing the stakes. This helps you create positive associations and experiences with the feared scenario. Professional climber and world record holder Alex Honnold used this exact same technique when climbing El Capitan with no ropes. He faced his fears to climb a 2,000 meter vertical slab of granite with no ropes. So I thought the least I could do is learn how to swim.
Think it's time to swim?
Swim where?
Once the pandemic settled and the pools reopened, I signed up for a baby triathlon. I literally only had a few months to prepare and learn to swim properly. It was a 400 meter swim, 15-kilometer bike, and a 4-kilometer run. It was exactly what I needed. My training became way more intense because I knew if I couldn't get those numbers in training, there was no way I could on race day. I pushed myself so much further than I thought possible and thankfully finished the race. Race day was immense. I felt like I'd come so far from where I'd begun, but there was still a ways to go. I gassed out very quickly and semi-cheated on the swim. Sounds familiar. I decided I needed help, and so let me introduce you to my friend Praveen. A fellow brown man who couldn't swim dove into the deep end and swam his way through many triathlons, including a half Ironman. And so we began our 6-month training. Rain, shine, or hail, we showed up every week for training. Until... This was my last challenge of the year. I thought, let's take it slow, let's make it real easy and comfortable. At least that was the plan. I had not felt afraid of water for many, many months. I had become so desensitized to it. But as soon as I got into that lake, I felt like I was that kid drowning all over again. My coach calmed me down and the intensity of that fear lessened. And I focused on my breath and thought only of my coach and my swimming form. We baby stepped it, our own mini exposure. First keeping my head above water and breaststroking up and down this small platform and not straying far from it. I felt things brush against my feet and the current of discomfort would jolt up my spine. And then I put my head under and it was nothing but darkness. Your eyes could barely see 30 centimeters in front of you. Beyond that, I didn't know what else was out there lurking in the lake. But I was soon going to find out. To make me more comfortable, we decided to put on my flippers and swim 250 meters away from the platform and into the belly of the lake. Focusing on my breath and not letting myself think about the darkness and the fact that I couldn't see anything, I glided through the water. I felt good. Before we knew it, I had passed 250 meters and my coach demanded that we aim for 500. I gathered my strength and used the momentum to push for the last 250. But then disaster happened. When I was swimming in stroke, suddenly in the periphery of my vision, an object appeared coming straight for me. All my coach could see was that I couldn't breathe and was gasping for air. Luckily, I had a swimming float behind me and I grabbed onto it for dear life. My inhales were sharp and I was completely and utterly terrified. After calming down, I explained to my coach what had happened, and he told me it was seaweed. But I was shook. I felt like I was about to have a panic attack, so I swam to the closest platform to get out. We looked back at where we had started, and I had swam 500 meters on top of the 100 meters near the platform. I felt victorious. 48 hours later, and we were back in the water, this time in our local training pool. The goal for this session was the penultimate 1-kilometer swim, a goal that I had been chasing for 2 years. There was no fear in this challenge, but physically, I had never swam this far in my life. Beating this goal meant so much more than just doing a long swim. All those times I'd felt too embarrassed, too self-conscious, too afraid. I didn't want to feel weak anymore. All those people in my life giving me their time, energy, and trust, and I didn't want to let them down. And so I had to think to myself, am I doing this for self-glory, or is it for something bigger? And so I dug deep. I could barely breathe and was seeing stars, but my coach kept pushing me to give more. The session ended and I looked up at my coach and he told me the final count. 1.1 kilometers. Not only had I got it, but I had surpassed my impossible goal by 100 meters. I had finally mastered my fear. So what's the thing you're afraid of that you're avoiding? The thing that you tell yourself you have no control over and were just dealt a bad hand. Most of us know we can do better, but we resign to be less. It isn't your fault you were dealt a bad hand, but it is your responsibility. So how long will you allow your past to hold you back before you finally take control of your future?